I never thought I would be the kind of man who measures his worth by the price tag on a gift, but standing there in the middle of my daughter's living room, holding a pair of $15 polyester socks while her father-in-law unboxed a $10,000 Rolex, something inside me just snapped. It wasn't about the money, or at least that's what I tried to tell myself, but the sheer level of disrespect felt like a physical blow to the chest that left me struggling for air in a room full of laughing people. Looking at those socks, then looking at the gleaming gold on his wrist, I realized that in my daughter's eyes, I had become nothing more than a background character in the high-stakes movie of her new life. I have to ask you all honestly, before I get into how this all blew up, was I wrong for feeling like I'd been slapped in the face? Or would you have felt the same way if your own flesh and blood treated you like an afterthought on Father's Day? To understand how we got to this moment, you have to understand who my daughter, Sarah, used to be and the life we built together. For 24 years it was just the two of us against the world. Her mother left when Sarah was only 3, and from that day on, she was my entire universe. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to make sure she never felt the gap her mother left behind. I wasn't a rich man, but she had everything she ever needed. I saved every penny to send her to the best university. I stayed up all night helping her with projects, and I was the one who held her hair back when she was sick and walked her through every heartbreak. We were inseparable. People used to tell me I was a super dad, and Sarah herself used to write me cards saying I was her hero and her best friend. I thought that bond was unbreakable, a foundation made of concrete that no amount of time or money could ever crack. I remember the small things, like the time I spent 6 months secretly saving up to buy her that specific dress she wanted for her 8th grade formal. I skipped lunches and walked to work instead of taking the bus just to see the look on her face when she opened that box. Back then, a gesture like that meant the world to her. We didn't have much, but we had a mutual respect that felt worth more than any bank account. I thought I was raising a woman who valued the sweat on a man's brow and the depth of his character. But then 3 years ago Sarah met Marcus. Marcus comes from a world I don't understand, a world of old money, country clubs, and summer homes in the Hamptons. His father, Julian, is the kind of man who breathes entitlement and wears suits that cost more than my first car. When they got engaged, I was happy for her, truly. I thought she was moving up in the world, and I was proud that my hard work had given her the confidence to walk in those circles. But slowly, I started to notice a shift. Sarah started talking differently, dressing differently, and most painfully, she started looking at our life, the life I provided, with a sort of quiet embarrassment. She started criticizing my house, saying the neighborhood was becoming a bit rundown, and suggesting I should move into a condo closer to their gated community, so I wouldn't embarrass her friends when they came to visit. She even started correcting my grammar and my table manners, as if the man who taught her how to speak and eat was suddenly a project that needed fixing. The wedding was the first real red flag. Julian offered to pay for the whole thing, but I insisted on contributing. I gave her $20,000, which was nearly half of my entire life savings, thinking it would show Marcus's family that Sarah came from a place of substance. Instead, Julian laughed it off and spent that much just on the flower arrangements, making my contribution feel like pocket change. Throughout the planning, I was pushed to the side while Julian and his wife took the lead. Sarah told me it was just because they had better taste for that kind of event, and I swallowed my pride because I wanted her to be happy. I remember sitting at the rehearsal dinner, watching Julian hold court, telling stories about his international business ventures while I sat there, a retired blue-collar worker, feeling like a ghost at my own daughter's celebration. After the wedding, the distance grew. Sarah stopped calling as much. When we did speak, it was all about the galas she was attending or the expensive gifts Julian was buying them. She started referring to Julian as Dad, almost as often as she called me that, and every time she did, it felt like a needle under my fingernail. She'd tell me about how Dad took them to the vineyard or how Dad was helping Marcus invest in a new tech startup. My role had been reduced to the guy who called once a week to ask if she was eating enough. This brings us to this past Father's Day. Sarah invited me over to their new mansion for a family brunch. I was excited. I bought a nice new shirt and spent weeks picking out a thoughtful gift for Marcus, thinking I could finally bridge the gap between our families. I arrived early, feeling a bit out of place in their marble-floored dining room, but I put on a brave face. Julian was already there, holding a glass of scotch at 11 in the morning, acting like he owned the air everyone else was breathing. He gave me a nod that was more of a dismissal than a greeting, and Marcus just waved from across the room while checking his phone. The air was thick with the scent of expensive catering, and the crushing weight of my own inadequacy. When it came time for gifts, Sarah got all excited. She stood up and made a whole speech about how much the fathers in her life meant to her. She went to Julian first. She handed him a large, heavy box wrapped in gold foil. As he opened it, everyone gasped. It was a Rolex Submariner, a limited edition piece that I knew for a fact cost $10,000 because I'd seen it in a magazine once. Julian beamed, sliding it onto his wrist, and Sarah hugged him, telling him he deserved the best for being such a guiding light in their lives. My heart was pounding. I thought, okay, if she's spending that kind of money, she must have something incredible planned for me too. Not that I wanted a watch, but I expected the effort to be equal, or at least close. Maybe she'd finally booked that fishing trip we'd talked about for a decade, or maybe she'd framed some of our old photos. Then she turned to me. She reached into a small shopping bag, not even a gift-wrapped box, and pulled out a 3-pack of plain gray socks from a discount department store. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," she said with a casual shrug. "I know you're always losing yours." The room went silent for a second. I looked down at the socks in my hand, the $15 price tag still stuck to the back. I looked at Julian's $10,000 watch. The contrast was so sharp it felt like I was being mocked. I felt the heat rising in my neck, a mixture of shame and boiling rage. Julian let out a little chuckle and said, "Well, at least they're practical, right?" Sarah laughed along with him, not even noticing the look on my face. She actually went back to her seat and started pouring more champagne, talking about how the watch matched Julian's eyes. It was as if I had already disappeared from the room. So that is the situation I found myself in. I was sitting at a table where I had spent 20 years sacrificing everything to build a future for a daughter, who now thought a $10,000 watch was appropriate for her father-in-law, while her actual father deserved a pack of discount socks. I was humiliated in front of people who already looked down on me. Before I tell you how I handled the rest of that brunch and the absolute chaos that followed when I finally decided to speak up, I want you to pause right now. Go down to the comments and tell me, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Or would you have made a scene? I really want to know if I'm the only one who thinks this is a total betrayal. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, just staring at those socks. I could hear them talking about the yacht Julian was planning to rent for the summer, but their voices sounded like they were underwater. I started thinking about all the times I went without a new coat in the winter, so she could have the best cleats for soccer. I thought about the thousands of hours I spent driving her to practice, the car repairs I did myself to save money for her tuition, and the way I never once complained about being tired. Sarah eventually noticed I wasn't eating. "Dad, is something wrong? You've barely touched your eggs," she said, her voice sounding annoyed rather than concerned. I looked up at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my little girl. I saw a stranger who had traded her soul for a zip code. I stood up slowly, and I placed the socks right in the center of her expensive porcelain plate, right on top of her half-eaten smoked salmon. "You know, Sarah," I said, my voice surprisingly calm despite the storm in my head. "I was thinking about that time you were 6 and you had the flu. I stayed up for 3 nights straight, missing work I couldn't afford to miss, just to make sure your fever broke. I didn't have anyone to help me. I didn't have a Rolex to tell me what time it was. I just had you." The table went dead silent. Marcus looked uncomfortable, and Julian narrowed his eyes, his hand instinctively covering his new watch. Sarah rolled hers. "Oh my God, Dad, are you really doing this right now? It's just a gift. Julian has done a lot for us lately with the house and Marcus's business. Don't be so sensitive. You're always making things about you." That was the breaking point. "Sensitive?" I asked. "I gave you $20,000 for your wedding. That was my retirement, Sarah. I lived in a cramped apartment for 10 years, so you could have a backyard. I worked myself to the bone so you could go to a school where you could meet people like Marcus. And you think it's okay to give the man who has everything a $10,000 luxury item, while giving the man who gave you everything socks. I turned to Julian. Enjoy the watch. I hope it helps you keep track of all the time you didn't spend raising her. I hope it reminds you every second of the day that you're wearing a prize you didn't earn. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked out. Sarah followed me to the driveway, screaming that I was embarrassing her and that I was bitter because I wasn't as successful as Julian. She told me that I was being ungrateful for the brunch and that if I couldn't be happy for her, I shouldn't bother coming around anymore. She actually said, "Julian is the father I always wanted, someone who actually has something to offer." I didn't say a word. I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing there in front of her mansion, her face twisted in a mask of spoiled rage. The aftermath was brutal. For the next week, I got dozens of texts from her and Marcus, calling me toxic and saying I ruined Father's Day. Marcus even had the nerve to tell me I owed his father an apology for being disrespectful in his home. Julian himself sent me a smug email saying that class isn't something you can buy, implying that my outburst proved I didn't belong in their world. But then something shifted inside me. I realized I had been living my life as a martyr for someone who didn't even respect the sacrifice. I decided I was done playing the role of the humble, silent father who just takes whatever crumbs are thrown his way. I spent 3 days gathering documents. I sent Sarah an itemized list. It wasn't a list of money I wanted back, because you can't put a price on love, but it was a list of every single sacrifice I'd made, alongside the bank statements showing the $20,000 I gave her for the wedding. I wrote a letter telling her that since Julian was so much better at being a dad, she could go ahead and ask him to cover the rest of her life. I told her I was selling the house she grew up in, the house she was so embarrassed of, and moving to a small cabin 3 states away near the mountains. I told her I was changing my will. I had planned to leave her everything I had left, including my modest life insurance policy and the house, but instead, I contacted my lawyer and donated every single cent of my remaining savings to a charity that helps single fathers navigate the legal and financial struggles of raising daughters alone. When Sarah found out I had actually gone through with it, she went ballistic. The annoyed daughter disappeared and was replaced by a panicked one. She tried to call me 100 times, crying this time, saying she didn't mean it and that the socks were just a silly mistake her personal assistant had suggested. She tried to claim she had a bigger gift coming in the mail, but we both knew that was a lie. She realized that her safety net was gone. I told her that the socks were perfect because they reminded me that I needed to walk away. I realized that she didn't love the father I was. She only loved the things I could do for her until someone richer came along. She had become a person who valued the glitter over the gold. Now, I'm living my life for me for the first time in 24 years. I spend my mornings fishing and my evenings reading books by the fire. I don't have to worry about whether my shoes are clean enough for a gala, or if my stories are sophisticated enough for Marcus's friends. Julian still has his watch, Sarah still has her mansion, but they don't have me anymore. And honestly, the silence is the best Father's Day gift I've ever received. I sometimes wonder if she looks at that Rolex on Julian's wrist and feels a pang of guilt, or if she's already moved on to the next person she can use. But then I realize it doesn't matter. I've reclaimed my dignity. This experience taught me a hard lesson. You can't buy love, but you can certainly see where you stand by how people choose to value you. I spent my life thinking that if I gave everything, I would be cherished, but sometimes all you end up being is a floor mat for people to wipe their expensive shoes on. I don't regret walking out, and I don't regret taking back my future. If you've ever felt undervalued by the people you love the most, just know that you have the right to walk away and start over. Your worth isn't determined by how much you can provide, but by the respect you demand for your heart. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by standing up for myself and leaving that brunch. Subscribe for more stories about real-life drama and the lessons we learn the hard way. And please, I really want to hear your final thoughts on this whole mess. Was Sarah just being thoughtless? Or was this a deep-seated sign of her character? Let's talk about it in the comments section. I'll see you all in the next story.